I love Food EDU. I think it's going to be such an exciting way for folks to learn and really dive deep into these subjects. The presentation that you heard from sorry, I'm losing my words. It's that time of day. From Kevin and Jackie really sets up our next two conversations well, as we talk more about Food EDU and how we communicate everything that the PTFI is uncovering. So Kevin, come and join me back on stage, along with Barbara Burlingame, a professor at the Ridditt Institute at Massey University. Round of applause for them both. Melanie Odenkirk, a research scientist at Colorado State University with the Periodic Table of Food Initiative. Woo! And I'd love to welcome back Natalia Vasquez Maneres of the National Institute of Medical Sciences and Nutrition in Mexico. Give them all a round of applause. So, Natalie, I'm sorry, Natalia, I'd love to start with you. You made the great analogy that when we spoke, that compared Food EDU to the Rosetta Stone, and I'm wondering if you can talk about that, because I think it's such a great comparison.
Yes, of course. So when we started talking about Food EDU, and I was fortunate enough to be invited into a table with all these amazing people that we've heard from today, one of the big questions was thinking, how are we going to do to make people that are not used to working with data to understand what is it that they're seeing? And so I was trying to come with an analogy of what is it that Food EDU can do for these people. And then comes the Rosetta Stone. So for those who are not familiar with it, the Rosetta Stone is literally a piece of stone that is engraved in 3 different languages. So you have Demotic, you have Egyptian hieroglyphics, and you have ancient Greek. And thanks to the presence or the discovery of this Rosetta Stone is that Egyptologists were finally able to understand very important things on this civilization. They could understand more about their politics, about their costumes, and then build on that many other questions that made this archaeology field grow. So for me, that is exactly what Food EDU is doing for whatever it is that we are going to find thousands of data and molecules on PTFI. It becomes a way where all people that work in different areas, nutritionists, dietitians, analytical chemists, mothers, farmers, and different people in different areas can use it to translate that information so that it becomes useful. Basically, for me, it's the way of how PTFI comes alive with the society.
It really is how this project will come alive. And I love that you mentioned both parents and farmers. A round of applause for that, because they need to be part of this solution. Melanie, I'm hoping that you can build on what Natalia talked about, this sort of translation, right? But also the ability for researchers like you and Natalia to communicate with one another. That's really groundbreaking.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll kind of speak to my experiences myself. I've been doing mass spectrometry for almost 10 years. But joining the PTFI, that was my first time working with food. And I remember injecting a carrot sample and injecting an apple sample and thinking something had gone disastrously wrong with the instrument. They looked so different. I had never seen anything like that before. And I needed people who understood food to explain why to me, to say, it's okay, it should look like this. That was a completely new thing to me. And people like Natalia, us being able to communicate with that, for her to understand that data and for us to have that conversation so that we can further advance what we know about food, I think is really impactful. And I think that's what Food EDU is doing.
Well, and I can see how excited it makes you. And that must make your job more fun, because we talked a lot about joy yesterday. Part of this is like making this exciting and fun and allowing you to enjoy your work, right?
Absolutely. So I am just the luckiest person at PTFI because I get to work with all of these labs and see the boots on the ground and all the expertise that these Good Food Fellows are bringing to the table. I get to learn from all of them. And I just feel so lucky to be a part of this program and to then bring that knowledge back to Food EDU as we work on these courses and think about as like, oh, I really care about how electrospray ionization works, but I know that not everybody else does.
Sure.
And so how can I make it so that they understand the principles that affect their data and what that means for the data they're working with without getting into all those technical details, but to really start that conversation where they can say, oh, I understand how this is a limitation. And if you are interested, like, now let's talk a little bit more about why that might be and what you can and cannot do, with what you're working with.
That's so great. Thank you for sharing all of that. Before I ask Kevin his question, I want to congratulate you on all this amazing work. I've learned so much from you over the last several months and about Food EDU. So give Kevin and Jackie another round of applause because they're doing something that really hasn't been done before, and I'm so excited about it. So I want to know why you started with the food. I can't pronounce it, Kevin. Foodomics. Oof. Foodomics and society class. Why start there?
Yeah, we started Foodomics in Society with this module called Ways of Knowing Food. And in a way, we're laying a foundation that we hope will bring people into the fold that might have no experience with analytical chemistry or foodomics, but that it gives them a way in. And it gives them some sort of recognition that wherever you are in your journey in understanding or helping transform food systems, that there is a place for you in the world of food composition. And that's been a unique insight of my own, having come into this world from a sociological background in food systems. And so when I think about biodiversity loss, for example, my first instinct isn't necessarily to go to the nutritional implications, but to the drivers of biodiversity loss, to the impacts that globalization in our food system has had, corporate consolidation in the food system, and things like that. So we're hoping to be able to kind of expand the frame of reference for why food composition matters, bring people into that fold, while at the same time maybe help expand the perspectives of analytical chemists. Not that it's necessary, but I do understand that for those who are trained in mass spectrometry, you're not necessarily getting another lesson that teaches you about sustainability in the food system and what some of those challenges might be. And in that way, we're hoping to bridge those worlds.
Again, it's real silo breaking, which we need so much more of. Can you talk a little bit more about the development of this? Because you're not used to talking to all of these different fields.
No, we're not. We were so incredibly fortunate that when we started reaching out to potential speakers, and when we had our sketch of our outline of a syllabus, really, we knew we wanted to kind of start it in this broad way. We asked our people in our network, who do you think would be a good person to speak to? And nearly everyone we reached out to said, yes, let's do it. And some of those initial conversations we had with people who became our global experts, such as Barbara herself, were so inspirational, because I think intuitively all of these experts who, again, came from very different fields recognized the importance of bridging those disciplines and how the world of food composition data could benefit from this kind of broader application and perspective that we were hoping to bring to the table. So we were really, really fortunate that all of these experts really just, I think, intuitively saw the value in what we were trying to do, and we're very much on board.
Yeah, they saw that opportunity, and I'm glad they got to it. That's great. Barbara, I want to switch gears a little bit and ask you, we've talked a lot about the opportunities for Indigenous folks and integrating their knowledge into the PTFI and then communicating that through Food EDU. But there are also a bunch of risks, right?
Yes, there are a number of risks. It relates to the ownership of data. It relates to free, prior, informed consent among Indigenous peoples. It relates to access and benefit sharing. And for example, maybe one of the risks is that ag biotech will look at these data and mine these data and create value for ag biotech companies or big corporations that are not passed on to the Indigenous peoples. That's one example of a risk, and we see this. We see it in Fiji, for example, where data, not just data, but the components from the foods have been what a colleague of mine called pirated. So we want to make sure, I think, that the benefits go back to the rights holders and indigenous peoples are rights holders in these ecosystems, but also the rights of nature need to be respected. And I think it's useful to mention the importance of the environment sector in all of this. Well, I mentioned the cross-cutting initiative on biodiversity for food and nutrition, which came out in 2006, but the Commission on Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture has declared that nutrients in foods are ecosystem services. And we need to be respectful of ecosystems. It's also the UN's decade on ecosystem restoration. When we look at the biodiversity from these ecosystems and we restore these ecosystems, let's make sure we're not introducing alien species. We see the damage to aquatic resources. We see it in the forestry sector where these exotic species become introduced and they become invasive and detrimental to the ecosystem. So some of those risks I think we can identify and maybe prevent.
So that gets to the crux of I think what I'm thinking about. How do we make sure that rights holders maintain their rights?
Well, I think the Alliance on Biodiversity, from Biodiversity and CIAT, they're doing a very good job making sure that the free, prior, and informed consent is always respected when foods are sampled, and also that access and benefit sharing. Okay, it's a difficult area to navigate, but to make sure that it is respectful and benefiting those rights holders.
Can you talk about what you mean by benefiting?
Well, in a lot of these initiatives, we couple indigenous people's food systems with knowledge systems. So there's a lot of knowledge in indigenous communities, but when things are commercialized, the benefits need to come back. One example of that, I think, is periodic table of food initiative. The UN had the International Year of Quinoa about a decade ago.
Right.
Quinoa became a superfood in the eyes of the world, and all of a sudden, from the Andes communities, quinoa was a major export product. So it did benefit the local people. But at the same time, it became such an expensive commodity that local people could not access the quinoa, which was part of their normal diet. So those kinds of risks, I think, need to be, we need to be aware of them. There are many more, and we need to make sure that we try to prevent them.
Sure, that acknowledgement part is really key to all of this. Thank you so much. Natalia, as we heard from your presentation earlier, the work you're doing is really strengthening our understanding of the Mexican diet and health implications. How would you like to see these implications conveyed through Food EDU?
And that is a very good question, Benny. Thank you. So just to make sure that I understand the question, is how would I like to see biomarkers implicated in Food EDU? So first of all, I just want to say that we have selected 7 amazing students who are from very different fields. Some of them are getting acquainted with the nutrition side, others are getting acquainted with more the agricultural side and what is it that food composition is and how you can measure that and so on. So what I would like BMX or this project to serve for these students and then maybe be able to translate it and echo it in different places is the fact that foods are unique or special within each other, and there are ways of how we can bring dietary patterns or create dietary patterns based on data-driven approaches instead of just trying to follow what it's been done for different for several years. So I think that's what I would like these BMX to have an impact on in Food EDU.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Do you want to talk about the case study on amaranth that we're?
Oh yeah, okay. So for Food EDU, our Center of Excellence is collaborating with a case study where we are going to focus on amaranth. Amaranth is a very special soda cereal in our country because it's linked back to our pre-Hispanic era. So actually Aztecs were using it to build different figures to use in their different religious settings. But when we were conquered, this cereal was so deeply used in our pre-Hispanic or by our pre-Hispanic ancestors that it was thrown out of their tables. And so what we want to do with this case study is bring amaranth back to as a possibility of a food, not just to go immediately to wheat or to our very loved maize in our country, but to understand how is it that something that has been in our culture for so long can be eaten as your staple.
Right.
So yeah, that's something that we are very excited to do with Food EDU. So stay tuned for the Amaranth case study.
I can't wait. Thank you so much. Melanie, I want to come back to you for a second because we've talked about this as well today, the potential for democratizing information more broadly. Can you talk a little bit about why that excites you?
Absolutely. And so as an analytical chemist, I work on what are usually very expensive machines that are very difficult to maintain. And because of all of these limitations, that technology does not exist equally across the world. And I think one thing PTFI in general is doing is really trying to make it so that that technology can exist places. But I think on top of that, what Food EDU is doing is really bringing it so that knowledge of the cutting edge research in all of these omics fields is also much more approachable to these communities who typically don't not only have access to the technology, but just like where these fields are going and what is really kind of like the hot topic in all of these directions. And so I'm really excited to see the democratization of this knowledge too,
Right.
and have people really start to like have a global, dialogue about this as opposed to the select countries that are really involved in those conversations now.
For sure. Thank you so much. Barbara, on that point, democratizing these resources and the infrastructure and the sort of the mechanics and the materials and the machines, that can help some of the risks you identified earlier, right?
I don't know about that. That's a good question. Well, first of all, to allow countries, developing countries, for example, to generate their own data, yes, that's extremely important, and that is one of the advantages of this of this whole initiative. That instruments are given to these centers of excellence, that reagents are given, that the expensive maintenance is provided for. So yes, and then if countries are generating their own data, then they are more likely to protect the ownership of those data.
Right.
So yes, that can help.
Where do governments and policy fit into that? Any thoughts?
Well, it's tricky because you've got UN system initiatives superimposed upon that. You've got the access and benefit sharing that comes from the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity. You've got indications of geographic indications of quality, which also kind of impinge upon that. You've got many different policies and programs, but I think the most important thing for a national government is that they can do things that are complementarity in the policy realm.
Right.
So, for example, one story I like is deep in the Andes are these beautiful fruits, and when people would visit these communities, in one community in particular, deep in the Amazon, and the elders would serve Coca-Cola to the guests, thinking this is more prestigious for a foreign visitor. Somebody gave them a paper from the Journal of Food Composition and Analysis. Several papers back in the 90s were published on the bioactive components of these indigenous fruits. Somebody gave them a paper on the anthocyanins and the polyphenolic compounds, and that inspired this community to give the local juices to the visitors with great pride. They really didn't know what anthocyanins or polyphenolic compounds were, but they knew it was something good because it said that in the paper, and they were very proud of that at
Yeah.
that point. So I think that too, and those data were generated in Brazil for
Right.
the community in the Andes, in the Amazon.
It's such an interesting thing to bring up because I think the PTFI can restore some of that pride and like respect of local folks for what they've been growing for millennia. So it's really cool to me. Kevin, you're starting with this one class, but I don't think it will be the last one. And I wonder what you're hoping to learn from Foodomics and Society and how it will shape sort of the future curriculum.
We've learned a lot, I think, about having a model for developing curriculum in close partnership with a scientific partner such as PTFI that will allow us to kind of touch on the expertise that those partners bring and allow the curriculum to unfold in a way where it's being led by the scientists who are on the cutting edge of a particular research initiative or initiatives. And so we look around at other fields where we see the science and the research perhaps outpacing some of those more formal educational opportunities, and how Food EDU might reach out to individuals within those fields to learn more about what cutting edge research that gets them excited and that they feel like could have some transformative potential in the food system. So we are looking, not that regenerative agriculture or agroecology, and quite the contrary, I mean, those are sort of in some ways ancient practices stewarded by indigenous peoples around the planet. However, we see this as an emerging field that's getting a lot of attention among the scientific community, especially as it relates to the science behind the nutrition and the soil and how soil composition, for example, could influence the nutritional composition of food. So the regenerative agriculture field and agricultural practices are one thing that we're focusing on, but we're also interested to think about this role that food as medicine could play and how we might be able to help bridge some educational gaps with curriculum that's a little bit more nimble than what you might find in other kind of formal educational opportunities. And also working with close partners, such as that we have at the AHA, who are on the front lines of doing a lot of that work.
Yeah, I kind of think of it as this living entity that will evolve and you'll keep adding to it. It's very cool. Congratulations again. Let's give all of these panelists a round of applause, please. Great work.
Thanks, Danny.